My phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling me out of a half-asleep daze. I glanced at the screen. Emily? She'd been gone for almost 3 weeks now, working on that big project out west. It was well past midnight in Chicago, and my first thought was that something must have gone wrong. "Hey, everything okay?" I answered a little groggy. "Oh, Matt," she said, her voice warm, but with a subtle edge of excitement that snapped me fully awake. "I didn't mean to wake you, but I couldn't wait. I have big news." There was a pause on her end. Then she let out a breath. "Matt, I'm pregnant." It took a second for the words to hit me, to settle in. Pregnant. It had been months since we'd even talked about starting a family, and things had been strained lately. Still, I could almost see her smile through the phone. That look she'd get when she was pleased with herself, but nervous too. "Yeah, that's amazing," I said, not quite sure how to react. When did you find out?" "A few days ago," she replied, her voice softening. "I wanted to wait until I was sure. I'll get a doctor's appointment when I get back next week, just to confirm everything, right?" "Yeah, of course," I managed, running a hand through my hair, trying to get a handle on the strange mix of emotions spinning through me. It was so sudden, so unexpected, but maybe this was what we needed to reconnect. "I can't wait to get back home, Matt," she added quietly. And then, just like that, the line went silent, leaving me with nothing but the sound of her words echoing in my mind. The call left me wide awake, staring at the dark ceiling as the reality of her words sank in. Pregnant. We talked about kids before, but the timing never felt right. My work, her traveling for projects, and lately, the distance between us. I hadn't even realized how far we drifted until the call ended. Her voice had sounded different. Excited, yes, but almost like there was something she wasn't saying. I turned onto my side, the clock ticking louder with each passing second, as doubts began creeping in, unwelcome but persistent. We hadn't been close in weeks. Her trips had become more frequent, and even when she was home, things felt off. But then I shook off the thought. I was just tired, I told myself. I hadn't seen her in nearly a month, and it was natural to feel a little uneasy about big news over the phone. So I took a deep breath and decided to sleep it off, looking forward to seeing her again soon. The next morning, I tried to bury those thoughts under a full schedule. My work as a security consultant kept me busy, focused. I moved from meeting to meeting, letting the day swallow up any lingering doubts. By afternoon, I'd almost convinced myself that I was just overthinking things. But later that evening, another unease set in. I'd started feeling off, physically this time, just a slight, nagging irritation that I couldn't ignore. By the next day, it had worsened, enough to make me set up a doctor's appointment. I figured it was probably something minor, but the test results hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd contracted an STD. The doctor's words echoed in my head. I couldn't even focus on what he was saying. It didn't make any sense. I'd been completely faithful to Emily since we'd married. No questions, no doubts. So how the hell could this happen? On the drive home, my mind spun with possibilities, each one darker than the last. There was only one answer that made any sense, and with that answer, the floodgates of doubt broke open. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling a cold anger rise within me. Emily had been distant, always finding reasons to be out of town, her phone calls shorter, her smiles thinner. And now, suddenly, she was pregnant. After all this time, I knew what I had to do. When I got home that night, I didn't waste time. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Emily would be back in a week, so I had a narrow window to find out what was really going on. First, I called Jack, an old friend and a damn good private investigator. We'd served together in the military, and if there was anyone I could trust to dig up the truth, it was him. The guy knew how to find a needle in a haystack without leaving a single trace. When he picked up, his voice was as casual as ever, like we'd just spoken yesterday. "Jack, I've got a situation. I need your help," I said, keeping my voice low even though I was alone in the house. "Anything, Matt. Just tell me what you need," he replied. No questions, just that sharp professionalism I'd always admired in him. I gave him a quick rundown, not sparing the ugly details. The pregnancy, the sudden distance, the STD. Each word felt like a blade, twisting deeper, but I forced myself to stay steady, to stay focused. Jack listened without a word, just letting me unload. When I finished, there was a long pause on his end. "All right," he finally said. "Send me whatever details you have on her work trips, the people she's been around. I'll look into it. Give me a couple of days." I thanked him, my voice clipped and tense. Hanging up, I felt a grim sense of purpose settle over me. This wasn't just about suspicion anymore. I was going to get to the bottom of this one way or another. Over the next couple of days, I kept up appearances, going about my routines as usual. I made sure Emily wouldn't notice anything off if she called. But inside, I was simmering, my mind racing with every possible scenario. On the third day, Jack called back, his voice low and serious. "I found something, Matt. She's been spending time with a guy named Harris. He's the director of the environmental project she's working on. They've had several, let's call them off-the-clock meetings, and it looks like this guy's ambitious. Got a bit of a reputation for getting what he wants, no matter what it costs." I felt a chill run through me. Harris. The name meant nothing to me, but knowing there was a face to match my suspicions only stoked the fire. "Send me everything you've got, Jack," I said, my voice cold. "I'm going to handle this myself." Jack sent over a file later that night. It was a digital dossier, complete with photos, timestamps, and notes on Harris. I opened it, my eyes scanning the grainy images of Emily and him together, meeting up at a quiet bar, having what looked like an intimate dinner. Then there was another photo, the two of them standing close at a conference hall, her hand lightly resting on his arm as they laughed together. The anger that simmered inside me was now white-hot, but I kept it in check. I couldn't afford to lose control. Not yet. As I looked at the photos, one detail caught my attention. Harris wasn't just another colleague. He was a known player in his field, someone who manipulated people and opportunities to climb higher. From Jack's notes, Harris had a string of friendships with married women in the business. Each one of these women had eventually ended up alone and burned, used up and discarded. And Emily had somehow fallen into his orbit, completely blind to his real nature, or maybe just ignoring it. But that was only half of it. According to Jack, Harris also had a habit of blurring business and pleasure, using any connection he could to secure deals and investments. I took a deep breath, absorbing everything. This wasn't just betrayal. This was manipulation. Emily was being played, or maybe she was just a willing participant. Either way, I knew I had to act fast, before Harris could worm his way into my life any further. I spent the next day making calls, meeting with a financial advisor I trusted. Together, we moved my assets, creating a trust to hold everything valuable: my retirement fund, the house, even a portion of my savings. Legally, I wouldn't own those assets. The trust would. It was a quiet way to shield what I'd worked for, ensuring it wouldn't be up for grabs in a messy divorce. But I wasn't stopping there. I decided to use the reputation Harris had worked so hard to build against him. Digging into his connections, I found out he'd been under scrutiny for financial mismanagement before, narrowly avoiding any major fallout. I forwarded Jack's findings to a contact in the press, anonymously, of course. It wouldn't take much to reignite suspicion around Harris, and that was exactly what I intended to do. Once I put the pieces in motion, I drafted the divorce papers. Clean, efficient, and final. There would be no arguments, no pleading, no chance for manipulation. As far as I was concerned, Emily had made her choice, and now she'd have to live with the consequences. I left the papers on the kitchen table, knowing she'd find them as soon as she returned. The next morning, I packed my essentials, a bag of clothes, some personal items, and my laptop. I'd made arrangements to stay in a cabin upstate, a place where I could be alone, away from any reminders of what Emily and I had once been. It was time to start fresh, to let go of the life I thought we'd build together. When I took one last look at the house, it felt hollow, stripped of meaning. I left my wedding ring on the counter beside the divorce papers, a final statement. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a cold satisfaction. I'd cut the ties cleanly, decisively. Whatever came next, I'd face it on my own terms, free from lies, free from betrayal. The drive upstate was quiet, but my mind was anything but. By the time I reached the cabin, dusk had settled over the lake, casting long shadows through the trees. I spent the evening unpacking, trying to shake off the weight of everything I'd left behind. There was a cold finality in knowing I'd ended it without saying a word, but it also brought a sense of closure, like I was shedding an old skin. The next morning, my phone buzzed. Emily. Her calls had come in all night, and now there was a flood of texts, each one angrier than the last. I ignored them all, but a few minutes later, a new call came through. Jack. This one I picked up. Matt, I've got an update. Harris is in hot water. That reporter you tipped off? They ran with the story. He's facing a full-scale audit. A smirk tugged at the corner of my mouth. Good. Let him sweat. Jack chuckled. Then his tone grew serious. Emily's been looking for you. From what I hear, she's not handling this well. She'll live, I replied coldly. If she's smart, she'll sign the papers and let this end clean. Jack hesitated. And if she doesn't? She will, I said, my voice hard. She doesn't have a choice. After we hung up, I poured myself a coffee, stepping outside onto the deck. The lake was still, the water like glass. I'd chosen this place for the silence, for the distance from everything I'd left behind. It was a world away from the mess back home. Then, the inevitable happened. That afternoon, Emily's car pulled up the gravel drive. I watched her get out, looking around before her gaze settled on me, standing on the porch with my arms crossed. Matt, she called, her voice breaking. What are you doing here? Why? Why are you avoiding me? I stayed silent, watching her as she stumbled up the steps. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes wide with confusion and hurt. You didn't even give me a chance to explain? I let out a low, humorless laugh. Explain? What exactly do you think you need to explain, Emily? Matt, it wasn't what you think. Harris and I, he's just a friend. The project kept us close, yes, but it was never serious. She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled back, a bitter smile spreading across my face. Never serious? I echoed, the words sharp and cold. You expect me to believe that? After everything? I shook my head, my voice steady, cutting. I saw the photos, Emily. I know about the late nights, the private dinners. I know about Harris's reputation. And then there's the little matter of the STD you gifted me. Her face went pale, and she stammered, I don't know how that happened. Maybe it was a mistake, Matt. Maybe. Stop, I said, my voice final. It doesn't matter now. I've left the divorce papers at the house. Sign them, or don't. But I'm done. She opened her mouth, then closed it, searching my face for any sign of sympathy. Finding none, her expression hardened. So that's it? After everything we've been through? That's it, I replied, turning away. Go home, Emily. Whatever we were, it's over. I heard her footsteps retreat, the sound of her car, doors slamming. Only when her car disappeared down the road did I let out a long, steadying breath. It was truly over. As Emily's car faded into the distance, I stayed on the porch, watching the last traces of her dust trail settle on the gravel road. The air felt still, heavy with finality. This was the end, and I'd made sure it stayed that way. There would be no second chances, no apologies, no excuses. I'd severed the last link, and for the first time in weeks, my mind felt calm, clear. I spent the rest of the day working around the cabin, unpacking supplies, chopping wood for the fireplace. The physical exertion was a relief, burning through the last of my pent-up frustration. The ache in my muscles by evening was a welcome reminder that I was in control now, that I was moving forward. Night fell, and I sat by the fire, a glass of whiskey in my hand, staring into the flames. A dog barked in the distance, the only sound breaking the silence around me. It was a strange feeling, being so isolated, but it was exactly what I needed. No lies, no secrets, just the crackling of the fire and the cool night air. My phone buzzed on the table next to me. I glanced over, expecting another message from Emily, but it was Jack. Jack. Harris's troubles just got worse. The audit uncovered some offshore accounts he'd hidden from his company. Legal's all over it. He'll be lucky if he walks away without jail time. I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction at the news. Harris was going to get exactly what he deserved. That man had not only used Emily, but he'd manipulated and destroyed others for his own gain. Whatever charm he'd used to climb his way up the ladder, It was finally catching up to him. Good. Let him drown in it. I turned my phone off and set it back down, a sense of peace washing over me as the firelight flickered. There was something liberating about knowing justice was unfolding without me having to lift a finger. I'd set the wheels in motion, but now it was beyond my hands. And as for Emily, that chapter was already closed. She played her part in her own downfall. The days began to blur together in the best way. I fell into a simple routine. Wake up early, make coffee on the porch as the sun rose, hike the surrounding trails, work on setting up the cabin for a long-term stay. My hands were always busy, the ache of physical work grounding me in the present. One morning, while chopping wood out back, a car pulled up the drive. My guard went up instantly. Not many people came out this way, and I hadn't told anyone else about the cabin. I set the axe down, wiping my hands on my jeans as a tall, burly man stepped out of the car. He looked to be in his 50s, rugged and tough-looking, with a no-nonsense expression. "Matt, right?" he called, eyeing me with a respectful nod. "I'm Carl. Jack mentioned you might be looking for some extra security work out here. Said you're good with training folks." I hadn't expected that. Jack knew I'd been thinking about starting a survival training camp, but I hadn't told him I was ready to jump into it. Still, something about Carl's straightforward manner appealed to me. "That's right," I said, walking over and shaking his hand. His grip was firm, a reminder of the world I'd come from. "What are you looking for?" "Got a few clients who want to learn back-to-basic survival skills. Things that aren't in a manual." He grinned slightly, glancing at the surrounding forest. "Figured you'd be the right man for the job." The idea took root in my mind. I'd been thinking about how to rebuild, how to create a life that was mine alone, training people in survival techniques, teaching them to handle the elements. It was something I could do, something that ran through my veins after years of military and security work. "Let's talk details," I said, gesturing toward the cabin. We sat at the rough-hewn table on the porch, going over logistics, discussing schedules and training plans. By the time he left, I had a clear vision of what was next. This wasn't just a job. It was a purpose, a way to keep my skills sharp and share what I'd learned. After Carl left, I sat back, feeling a rare sense of satisfaction. I'd found a new direction, a new beginning. No ghosts, no memories. Just me, the wilderness, and the challenge of building something from scratch. As I looked out over the trees, the future finally felt like it was in my hands. The next day, I headed down to the lake, hoping to clear my mind and map out a few ideas for the training program. The air was cool, the scent of pine and damp earth surrounding me. I figured I'd have the place to myself. Most people around here kept to their cabins or small cottages, especially in the early hours. But as I rounded the path near the water's edge, I saw someone else there. She was kneeling by the lake, dipping her fingers into the water, her back to me. She had long, dark hair that cascaded down her back, and her jeans were rolled up to her knees, as if she'd been waiting. For a moment, I considered turning back, not wanting to intrude. But just then, she looked up and noticed me. "Hi there," she called out, standing up and brushing her hands on her jeans. She had a bright, warm smile, the kind that was hard not to return. "Didn't expect anyone else out here this early." "Same here," I replied, walking a bit closer. "You, new to the area?" She nodded, her smile widening. "Just moved up from the city. Needed a change of pace." "I'm Grace, by the way." "Matt," I said, reaching out to shake her hand. Her grip was gentle, but there was a confidence about her. She was probably mid-20s, her energy and curiosity refreshing against the quiet backdrop of the lake. "Nice to meet you, Matt. You from around here?" "Sort of," I replied with a shrug. "Not exactly. I'm renting a cabin up the road for now, planning to start some survival training programs." Figured it was the perfect place for it. Her eyes lit up. "Survival training? That's pretty intense. Are you former military or something?" I nodded, studying her reaction. "Yeah, something like that. Just looking for a way to keep busy." She laughed lightly. "Well, if you need a volunteer or someone to test out your program, I could probably use some survival skills myself. City life didn't exactly prepare me for roughing it up here." Her voice was playful, her eyes sparkling with interest. I raised an eyebrow. "You sure? It's a little more than campfire stories and s'mores." She smirked, crossing her arms. "Oh, I think I can handle it. Try me?" Her confidence caught me off guard. Most people shied away from anything resembling real outdoor training. But something in her gaze told me she was serious, or at least curious enough to try. "All right, Grace," I said with a faint smile. "Tell you what, I'm putting together some basic survival sessions. We start with fire building, water sourcing, a few emergency shelters. You come by in the morning if you're really up for it." She grinned. "Deal. I'll be here at sunrise, ready to learn." I watched her walk back up the path, her energy lingering long after she disappeared into the trees. It was strange meeting someone so unexpectedly, especially someone who seemed genuinely interested in what I was doing out here. It was a refreshing change from the isolation I'd come to expect. That night, as I sat by the fire, I couldn't help but think about Grace. Her excitement, her openness. It was a reminder that life didn't have to stay bleak or cut off. Maybe the cabin and the lake weren't just a place to escape, but a chance to build something new, one step at a time. At sunrise, I was by the lake, ready to see if Grace would show up, curious to see if she'd really take me up on the challenge. The sun had just started to crest over the lake, casting soft pinks and oranges across the water. I set up a small area with some basic supplies: flint, a few pieces of kindling, and a pile of sticks for a fire-building demonstration. I honestly didn't expect Grace to show up, thinking it was just polite talk the day before. But then, I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. I turned, and there she was, bundled in a fleece jacket, a mug of coffee in her hand, and that same eager smile on her face. "You're early," I said, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. She shrugged, taking a sip of her coffee. "I figured if I'm going to learn survival skills, I'd better show up ready. Besides, it's gorgeous out here at this time." I handed her a piece of flint and a steel striker. "All right, let's see what you can do. We'll start with fire. Survival 101. She took the tools from me, looking a little nervous but determined. "So, you just strike it, right?" I showed her how to angle the steel and flick the flint to create sparks. After a few tries, she got the hang of it, sending a small shower of sparks onto the kindling. She let out a triumphant laugh when a small flame finally caught, her face lighting up as she fed the fire with small sticks, carefully fanning it until it grew. "There you go," I said, impressed. "You're a natural." "Only because I had a great teacher," she shot back, grinning as she watched the fire crackle to life. She looked up at me, her eyes dancing with excitement. "So what's next?" "Next we find water. We'll go over some basics on identifying safe water sources, how to filter it if necessary, and a few other tricks." We spent the next couple of hours hiking along the lake and through the surrounding woods. Grace was eager, asking questions, her curiosity never wavering. She stumbled a few times on the rough terrain, but laughed it off, brushing the dirt off her jeans and pushing forward. I had to admit, I was impressed. Not many people had her kind of grit, especially after coming straight from the city. Eventually, we stopped at a small clearing near a stream. I showed her how to create a simple filter with sand, charcoal, and gravel. She was attentive, even taking notes on her phone, as if she didn't want to forget a single detail. "So," she said after a while, looking over at me as she filtered the water, "what made you decide to start doing this out here? It's not exactly a regular career path." I took a breath, not sure how much I wanted to share, but something about her openness made it easy to talk. "Needed a change," I said simply. Life back in the city wasn't working out. Things got complicated. I needed to find something that mattered. She nodded thoughtfully, not pushing for details, and I appreciated that. "I get it. Sometimes life just needs a hard reset." She glanced at me, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Besides, teaching survival skills to lost city girls seems like it could be pretty rewarding." I chuckled, shaking my head. "If you can keep up, maybe—" "Oh, I can keep up," she shot back, feigning offense, though I could see the challenge sparking in her eyes. "In fact, I'll come back tomorrow, and you can try and wear me out." The sun had risen higher by then, filtering through the trees, casting dappled light across her face. For the first time in a long while, I felt something shift in me, a small crack in the walls I'd built around myself. "All right," I said, smiling despite myself. "Tomorrow it is." As we made our way back to the lake, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this place wasn't only about leaving my old life behind. It could also be about building a new one with connections I hadn't anticipated. And as I watched Grace disappear up the trail, I found myself looking forward to tomorrow. Over the next few weeks, Grace showed up at sunrise like clockwork, ready to learn whatever I threw her way. She was tougher than I'd expected, gritty, determined, unafraid to get her hands dirty. We moved from basic fire building and water sourcing to more advanced skills, creating shelters from scratch, foraging for edible plants, even basic navigation and tracking. Each morning brought new challenges, but also a new ease between us. Our conversations grew deeper, more open. She shared stories of her life in the city, why she'd left, a career that was stifling her creativity, a relationship that had ended in betrayal. I found myself relating more than I'd expected, sharing pieces of my own story about the complications and heartbreak that had driven me to leave everything behind. For the first time in a long time, I felt understood. Grace wasn't just a student anymore. She was becoming a friend, someone who shared my growing respect for the quiet strength of nature, the freedom and clarity it offered. One morning, after a particularly grueling session where we'd hiked miles into the forest, Grace surprised me with a question. "What are you running from, Matt?" I glanced at her, surprised by the directness in her voice. There was no judgment, only curiosity. "Honestly," I replied, looking out over the lake. "My past. Things got messy. People I trusted turned out to be something else. And I realized I'd been building my life on a foundation that could crumble at any moment." She nodded, taking it in. "Then maybe this is your chance to rebuild. Not just escape." Her words stuck with me, echoing in my mind as we wrapped up that day. She was right. Somewhere along the line, what had started as an escape had turned into something different. This wasn't just about putting distance between me and my old life. It was about creating something new, something real. And for the first time, I realized that this new life might not have to be so solitary. Days turned into weeks, and with Grace's help, I began planning the survival training program in earnest. Word spread quickly, and soon people from the surrounding areas started to reach out, campers, hikers, even families looking to learn the basics. The program grew from a simple idea into a full-fledged operation, with Grace often by my side, helping me guide groups through the trails, teaching them the skills she'd learned. As we worked together, our bond deepened, becoming something more than friendship. Grace had brought a lightness and hope I hadn't felt in years, a reminder that maybe not everyone in this world was out to hurt or betray. She had a resilience, an optimism that balanced my quiet intensity, and over time, our connection became undeniable. I was finally ready to let go of the bitterness that had been weighing me down and to open up to the possibility of a future not haunted by betrayal, but filled with new purpose. Months passed, and the training program thrived, becoming a staple in the local community. People from all walks of life came to learn, reconnect with nature, and find their own inner strength. The cabin that had once been my solitary retreat transformed into a lively hub of activity, a place where people could discover something real. In the end, Grace was right. I hadn't just run away. I'd built something new, something meaningful. And as I stood by the lake one evening, with Grace beside me, watching the sun dip below the trees, I knew I was finally free from my past. What had begun as a journey to escape had led me to exactly where I was meant to be, with the person who helped me find my way there.